Dear colleagues, good afternoon to everyone. I'm Sofia Ptashenko and I'm the managing partner of UDP Renewables company. And today I'm the facilitator of this panel. We are very glad that we have very special panelists and experts. Each of them is a leader and an outstanding person, an experienced expert in his or her field. On the topic of our today's discussion runs as follows: how climate change will change your business. Is that okay? Can you hear the translation? Yes? Okay. According to the analytical data of the most reputable research organizations, today the issue of climate change is within top 5 challenges of the modern times for the humanity and for the existence of people. This is a lively, dynamic topic which is highly topical at their G7, G20 summits, and the world leaders are all the time discussing the issues of climate change and the influence of climate on the change of our life. Is mankind ready for such changes? Are the governments of the countries ready to accept these challenges, and is business ready to accept them? How do we change? How do we get adjusted? What could be the best regulations and practices that could be applied? That's what we're going to discuss with our highly distinguished guests. I would like to introduce our speakers, and I will start with Mr. Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker. Mr. Weizsäcker is the co-president of the Club of Rome and the co-chair of UNEP's resource panel. Mr. Professor is among top 100 most outstanding thinkers of the modern times, and that is a great happiness for us to have him here at our forum. Mrs. Elżbieta Klein, Director and Global Head of Climate Business at International Finance Corporation. Elżbieta passes daily decisions for hundreds of millions of dollars to fund certain projects in the developing countries, which are related to the challenges of the modern times, in particular the issue of climate. Mr. Rafael Moteo, our good friend. Rafael is the CEO of Acciona Energia Global company, which is the company number 1, a global operator in renewables and green energy, and which has only green kilowatts in its portfolio. Mr. Andreas Kuhlmann, who is Chief Executive of Deutsche Energieagentur, and he has to deal with German energy transition and regulation and legislation which are currently in operation and in fact in Germany. Welcome to Andreas. And also Alexander Semenets, who is Chief Ecologist of MHP Agro-Industrial Holding, which is one of the leaders of our industry and which is one of our blue chips. So welcome to Alexander. Well, let's welcome all of our speakers. You know, today we would also like to involve some sociological data, and we had a thorough preparation for the panel and had a series of sociological polls. Some elements probably will be introduced to you today, but also we will have a separate press conference for mass media on Thursday, and there we will show the results of Ukrainians' perception of climate challenges, whether they really think about those challenges and whether it's a problem, a concern for them, are they ready to pay for this, and who should bear the burden of responsibility for the regulation of climate risks, the government, business, or civil society. Before we start our discussion, I would like to show a small video, so please, you're welcome.
A climate change state of emergency this summer? Do you know why? Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has reached the highest levels in human history. Along with concentrations of greenhouse gases, the average global temperature rises. The rate at which Antarctic ice is melting has tripled since 2012. The figure for melting has jumped to more than 250 billion tons a year, or 28.5 million tons per hour. Extreme weather events are increasing in frequency and destructive power. From 2030 to 2050, climate change is projected to cause at least 250,000 deaths per year from heat stress, malnutrition, and infectious diseases. If the world does not start to overcome the effects of climate change immediately, over the next 50 years, 40% of the world's population may face drinking water shortages.
What do the citizens of Ukraine think about the dangers of climate change? Almost 58% of Ukrainians believe the environmental pollution is the greatest threat facing future generations. 73% of Ukrainians declare their readiness to act to improve the environment. However, 37% of Ukrainians are not ready to spend money to improve the country's environmental situation. 62% of Ukrainians view the situation with garbage and recycling in Ukraine as unsatisfactory. 53% of Ukrainians are not ready to even pay 200 Ukrainian hryvnias per month for efficient and safe recycling of household waste. Can humanity prevent the effects of climate change?
Developed countries begin their energy transition as a gradual abandonment of fossil fuels in favor of renewables. The aim is to achieve zero carbon emissions by 2050 and reduce the carbon intensity of GDP. The governments of Europe are investing enormous amounts of money in the implementation of public and private environmental projects. The old business approach has been replaced by new ones. IKEA, Nike, Starbucks, Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook are all switching to renewable energy sources exclusively. Hugo Boss, Puma, Adidas, and H&M Group are starting production using eco-friendly materials. Mercedes has declared intentions to restructure production to focus on electric trucks. Potential global investment in climate change-related businesses is approximately 23 trillion. Developing countries need an estimated 100 billion in new investment annually to ensure their economies are resistant to climate change. Government, business, society, all three must work together. What solutions do businesses need today to maintain their position tomorrow? Who in our country should update the environmental agenda? How will climate change your business?
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we start this discussion. And my first question is to Professor Weizsäcker. Professor, today we are the first generation who detected the serious ecological issues and that it really endangers the future of human species. It is very important that to develop the ecological mindset. And what is your opinion? Can be a society environmentally responsible if the resources are produced and delivered at very low prices? So can we develop an ecological mindset if we provide low prices on electricity or gas? What is your opinion?
30 years ago, when Ukraine separated from the old Soviet Union and the communist regime collapsed, I made the following formulation. Communism has collapsed because it wouldn't allow prices to tell the economic truth, leading to unbelievable wastage of values. Capitalism, however, is going to self-destroy itself if we are not in a position to make prices tell the ecological truth. This is the current situation. You get rich by doing the wrong things. Building a new coal power plant in India or in Paraguay is tantamount to a permit to print money. And therefore, it's done all the time. While we are sitting here and speak, roughly 1,000 new coal power plants are being built in the world or planned. So, the question for climate is not whether Ukraine can accommodate. That's also a good question for you. But for climate, the main thing is getting the developing countries on board, because this is where the current action of global warming is taking place.
Thank you, Professor. It's very interesting. You are saying about taking on board developing countries, but developed countries, especially for example, United States, are about to leave this board and to exit from existing international treaties.
It's a scandal.
In Europe, we have a different strategy.
In The Guardian, we had a map of the world this week in which Europe is the shining Earth part where we really do something. Still not enough. But in Asia, in the Americas, in Africa, the opposite is happening.
Elżbieta, maybe you will add something about US position. Maybe.
Check. Okay. I think I'm going to pick up on what Professor Weisserker said about developing countries, and then we can talk about the US. I think you are absolutely right. What we have to do is develop a different growth trajectory in developing countries. And this is why we at the IFC decided to put a third of our investments every year, year in, year out, into climate business in emerging markets, because this is where we can actually make a difference. This is where it matters, and this is where it's visible today. And the title of today's panel is, How Will Climate Change Your Business? I've got a big surprise for you. The climate has already changed your business. If you talk to every single large agribusiness company today, globally, including here in Ukraine, and I wonder what my colleague Alexander will say, climate has already changed your business. Maybe you don't call it climate, maybe you call it weather, maybe you call it inability to obtain flood insurance coverage, maybe you call it something else, but it has already changed your business.
IFC is promoting massively a lot of projects in developing countries. What are the best cases you would like to mention? What are the best projects you've just financed over the last 12 months?
Sure. So I'd like to mention that oftentimes when we talk about climate, we talk about clean energy. And in IFC, we are looking at it a little bit more comprehensively. So obviously, clean energy is the pillar of the climate transition. But we also look at climate-smart agriculture, climate-smart agribusiness, because it's both a victim and a perpetrator of climate change. We are looking at green buildings, and in Ukraine, it's quite obvious because over the past 20, 30 years, you have been refurbishing a lot of old buildings, which were not green buildings. They were not built as energy-efficient buildings. And in emerging markets, you can actually build it green in the first place. We are also looking at smart cities, because with urbanization in emerging markets, that's where you can make the most difference. And last but not least, we are looking at green finance. And in terms of the project, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a heads up. We have a fantastic cooperation here in Ukraine with Ukrgazbank. And we are hoping to make a big announcement in a few weeks' time. But even now, we have worked with them on a number of advisory projects, and we are really looking forward to see how this bank is going to be a shining example of green banking in Ukraine.
Thank you, Elżbieta. My question is to Rafael. Rafael, Acciona is a global leader in renewables, and you produce, and you are very proud that company produces only green kilowatts. Question to you is, what will happen with the energy sector in future? Is it possible to make a transition to 100% renewables?
Yes, no, it's not yet possible. It's not yet possible. Probably is the future. The future will be a very smart mix between renewables, wind, solar, and storage. And there will be no more nuclear, no more coal, even no more fuel or combined cycle in the future. Our company started 20 years ago in the demonstration that the sustainability is a business itself. 20 years ago, our claim was pioneers in development and sustainability. Today, our claim is business as unusual. But the idea is that the energy transition is the present today. An energy transition is not a question just of ecologism or environment. It's a question, first, is a legal obligation. There are many countries that they have legal commitments with the European Union or with the population in order to reduce the targets of emission, of CO2 emissions. It's a moral obligation also for the companies and for the capital, because there is no planet B. And there is also a business itself. That this is a very clear message. To invest in the climate change is not modifying the business. The climate change is a business itself. It's a business because there are a lot of new jobs around the energy transition. The figures, according with Irina from the UN offices in Dubai, is that we will lose a lot of job position moving out of the fossil economy. But we will multiply by 3 or 4 the new position in the renewables economy. Same in terms of capital, trillions that are coming to the renewables, because renewables is the only energetic product that is offering the more stable dividend, the most stable yield to the investor, because there is no any kind of risk around the renewables, no risk of pricing, dispatching, technologies, everything is very simple and very stable. But things in terms of dependency. I don't know exactly the case of Ukraine, but I can talk from my own country. We are burning every day 110 million euros. That is 40 billion euros every year that we are importing from the gas and oil country producers to import and to burn in transport or in generation. So it's an obligation from the legal, moral, and economical point of view.
Thank you, Rafael. My question is to Andreas. Andreas, you are for so long in a climate administration in your country. The country is a role model in European Union how to treat climate change, how to be responsible in developing climate policies. You've done a phenomenal transition from nuclear energy to more and more renewable energy, and I've read some figures that during this year even up to 70% of consumed electricity in Germany was produced by, in some periods of time, was produced by renewables. Germany is a huge economy. It's like 20-25 times bigger economy than Ukrainian one. And Ukrainian economy is heavily dependent on nuclear energy, which consists 55% of our total energy mix. How did you make it? How feasible was this policy? So now it's already like 10-15 years since you started this transition. Now you have some opportunities to make your judgments. Was it successful? How did you make it? And if you have to make this decision again, was it correct decision or not?
Well, that's quite a few questions here.
Yeah.
First of all, I have to say that when you're in Germany and you talk about energy transition in Germany, you find many, many people complaining. Not because we are doing it too fast, but because we think we are doing it not fast enough. So, I mean, when I'm abroad, I always like that. If people say, oh, you're still a role model for energy transition, that really helps to keep on working at home. But how did it start? Well, I mean, because of people like him, for example, because of people who really saw the problem coming, and because of many, many grassroots organizations and people who really, actually, I must say, first wanted to get rid of nuclear energy. That was one of the basic drivers at the beginning. So here we had some different issues at that time, but nevertheless, and then we saw, well, it's kind of working. Wind and solar is getting cheaper and cheaper, and we had this great feed-in tariff laws, which some smart people really worked on hard, and it started very, very tiny. But now it's a major law, and it really, I think this law kind of changed so many countries all over the world, because so many countries were copying that law. And then later on, of course, we run into problems regarding that law because it's too expensive and stuff like that. But what it shows you that if you have a good idea and you start simple, but if you are then at the same time convinced that you add up a little bit year after year, then you really can change something, and that is what happened in Germany. Well, I mean, still there's lots of work to do, honestly, and I really would like to make the focus a bit broader, because whenever we are talking about climate change and energy and so on, we talk about renewables. But if we really want to fight climate change, there's much more out there. At German Energy Agency, we work in industry sector, in traffic sector, in the building sector. We work on renewables, we work on green gases and all these things. Efficiency is playing a major role in that game. And I mean, if you hear all these words, then you can always pick some which would probably fit very good to your country. And well, that's why I always want to say that it's a broader thing. Well, what would we do different, Ernst Ulrich, if we would start again? Well, a couple of things, but I mean, that's the past. You know? Let's rather see what kind of things could other countries copy. We're also working a lot in different countries, like in Ukraine as well. And here, I mean, you have great chances. When we started in Germany, prices were so high. Nobody could imagine that they come down so much. Nobody could imagine that you could run anything else but a watch with batteries. Now batteries are there, and you really can do a lot of things with them. We're talking about power to X, and we see an integrated energy approach in so many countries, so many studies about this, and we see jobs not only in the renewable sector, but also in the efficiency sector, also in new mobility sector. So it's not only the often mentioned 400,000 jobs in Germany, but many, many more, because we are really on the way, and I think it's a promising challenge.
You say that 400,000 jobs are created in climate-oriented...
No, I wanted to say the opposite. We always say that 400,000 or 370,000 jobs are created in renewables alone.
In renewables alone.
So, and then, even in my country, so many people forget that we created so many more jobs on green tech. Germans' share on the worldwide green tech is 13.5% at the moment, and it's way more than 1 million of jobs. If you have a heating system, you probably have one from Bosch, Weiland, Fissmann, who is one of these companies. And why are they so efficient? Because we have energy transition in Germany, because there are targets, and these companies were trying hard to adopt to these targets, and now everybody is able to buy that kind of technologies from countries like Germany, for example.
Thank you, Andreas.
Let me add something. Roughly 100 countries of the world, including China, have more or less copied the feed-in tariffs law.
Feed-in tariffs law of Germany.
Of Germany.
Okay. Alexander, you are Ukrainian businessman. You are a Ukrainian company. Do you feel that climate changes are really influencing your business, and in what way it happens?
Алло. Так. Доброго дня.
Good afternoon. MHP, which is my company, is not just an agricultural company. This is an agro-industrial holding which consists of different companies, different enterprises, and therefore they are sensitive to climate changes to a different degree. It has been stated today that agricultural sector is a kind of a victim of climate change. But at the same time, it's very important that the company has been among the first to start making targeted steps to fight climate change. This is not only about transition to green energy, that's also what we mentioned about biogas installations, also some briquettes which are made from waste. We have solar panels on our plants, but we also need to mention that we as an agricultural company need to control not just greenhouse gas emission from direct combustion, but the greenhouse gas emission, well, not greenhouse gas emission, but this emission, this, like, let's say carbon, that is getting carbon in the soil. And little is mentioned about that. I can see that you agree with me. Since we saw that reduction of pesticide use per 1 kilogram per hectare leads to reduction of emission by 3.5 or even 4 times of CO2 equivalent, which is highly important because on the other hand we realized that our biogas plant, which operates on the basis of the company located in Dnipropetrovsk region, and it has already reduced for a couple of years emission of CO2 by some 500 tons, and their plant, which is now under construction and which will start operating, will reduce this emission in CO2 equivalent by 860,000 tons, which is a very great figure. But we should not forget that it's of importance to comply with the best practices, agronomic ones. Why is it important to deal with carbon in the soil? It's not to have it its like capacity, its properties at the same level, but for it not to be oxidized to CO2, because they may be oxidizing 1-to-1, like 1 ton of carbon will be 1 ton of CO2 equivalent, and that's why we should keep to the best practices which will show us what we have to do. It shouldn't be just control and stage-by-stage reduction of the use of pesticides, but these are also some other ways. This is like reduction of arability of lands, the use of compost, because carbon available in compost is more prone to oxidation, less prone to oxidation, sorry. That's why for such a large agro-industrial holding as our company is, it's important to take into account not just energy, green energy, but the best economical practices. Alexander, one more question to you. You work in Ukraine, therefore you work with Ukrainian legislation. What are the key challenges you have faced with in relation to Ukrainian legislation? Do you feel comfortable within this legislative field? Well, it's not a secret for anyone that now we are trying to harmonize, implement the best practices and acquis communautaire, and that's why we are now in the transition period. We have some part of bylaws and sanitation rules of the EU that have already been cancelled, but nothing has been suggested as a replacement for them, as a substitution. And I also would like to point it out that it would be very good if the state was providing an incentive, was like setting the pace in climate change overcoming. And I, as an ecologist, would find it good if there was an online tool for every business to be able to check how much it affects climate, the situation with ecology. We could include the amount of pesticides, energy we consume, like diesel, oil, or petrol, or natural gas. And this would be then it would be clear for us how we influence the situation. I don't know whether the tool is generally available, but unfortunately, at least we don't have this tool which would ensure a unified approach to measurements.
To all panelists about responsibility. A responsibility of government or business for facing a climate change. From your perspective and from your role experience, career experience, who is much more efficient in dealing and facing the challenges of climate issues? Government, business, or civil society, or just people? Who has to take a lead and who has to take the responsibility? Professor?
Call me Ernst, but evidently all three. The state is responsible for setting the right frame. Civil society should be alert and do something, and in two different manners. Greta Thunberg managed to get the media on her side. Jeremy Leggett, a British guy, has initiated the so-called divestment campaign, making institutional investors getting out of coal, leading to a situation where coal companies lose money, you know? Not all of them, of course, but it has been a real shift. The divestment campaign has been very important. And companies, you mentioned also some German companies. I believe the most conspicuous one is Bosch company. They have now a commitment of being carbon or climate neutral by 2020, meaning in a few months, you know? So all of them have their responsibility, and what we as intellectuals have to find is synergies, for instance, between agriculture. What Alexander said is very, very important, that good soil absorbs carbon dioxide, which is good for health, good for climate, good for biodiversity, and if prices tell the ecological truth, it's good for farmers.
Thank you, Ernst.
Sergey, I'll add one more constituency that you didn't mention, and that constituency is investors.
Investors.
And when you look at the civil society is obviously a non-governmental organization, but investors as well. So we have seen a number of surveys now where asset owners, for example, pension funds, with billions under management, are saying that they would like to align their portfolios to 2 degrees. And they are asking fund managers to actually make a difference. And so what we are observing today is that it's not the governments, but it's actually the investors and businesses, just like Professor Weisserker said, who are actually leading that. We've got a number of businesses who signed up recently to Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition. They are applying carbon prices in their business and are screening out activities that are not profitable under certain carbon price regime. And that carbon price is not given by the governments. It's actually voluntarily accepted by businesses. So I'd like to add one more constituency to your question and just echo what Professor said in terms of leadership today.
Thank you, Elżbieta. So we are talking about a kind of green ethics now in the financial world.
It's actually green profits.
Green profits.
I think green ethics is one, but green profits is the other one.
Thank you.
Well, I also want to add, because I see that, and it's true, the divestment campaigns, all the companies, I could mention so many, but the question is, why are they doing that? And here you can see that things interact, the different roles interact. I think Paris was very important. Before that, the scientists have been very important. And now in Paris was actually made by politicians. So here politicians did something, and after Paris, all the companies, all the investors had the impression this is irreversible. There will be a mega trend towards decarbonization, and if politicians will help us making it faster, fine, but if not, nevertheless, we have to go that way. So here is, I think, without scientists and then without civil society, who makes it easier for politicians to make those decisions, we probably wouldn't have had these interactions in economy and so on. All parts are important.
Rafael?
Yes, the same. It's the same. Three of them. Three of them are responsible. So I think the citizen, or the consumers, the companies, and the government, for the citizen, is a huge responsibility. We are today living the first generation that is knowing about the negative effects of the climate change, but at the same time, we are the last generation able of doing something to mitigate these effects. So this is in our hands, in the hands of people that is living today in this kind of positions. Technology is available, money, capital is available, investors are available to invest in renewables because they are very stable. So governments have a very important role. The government needs to work making the rules, making the regulation in order to guarantee stability, clarity of the rules, a clear regulation, no retroactivity effects to the investors, because when the investors are investing in energy assets, they're taking investment decisions for the next 50 years. So the rules needs to be so clear. So the governments have a very important role in this chapter.
Thank you. Alexander?
Так, я погоджуюсь.
I do agree with everything which has just been mentioned, but I would like to add that of importance is also the system of education, in particular preschool education. Because when we say that business should and can do this, not only because the client demands it or because it has its own internal need to fight climate change, but when everybody in the state realizes that it cannot be any other way that will work on a sustainable basis. That's why I think that every issue related to morale, to our attitude to the environment, should be covered at the stage of preschool education, and then it should continue at school, and then the person will have this lifelong understanding that business could not be done in any other way. It's only possible to do it this way. It's necessary to invest money not into dirty economy, but into clean energy, if there is an opportunity like that. But in all the other things, I fully agree with what has been mentioned.
Ernst, my question is to you. In your books, you say that ecologically positive is the culture of the modest way of life. To consume less, to use equipment longer time, and to be modest in your way of life. Why is it important, and is it a part of German way of thinking, or is it a part of European way of thinking? Why modest way of life is important, at your opinion?
I use the term modesty very rarely. My main point is the following. Let prices tell the ecological truth, so that whoever is reasonable economically and morally will do the right things. But that requires a frame by the state. And adding to what Alzbeta said to investors, it is not necessary that the ecological prices cause a big pain. The most important thing for investors is that it's predictable. So if you have a very small step of addition for carbon dioxide prices, and investors can calculate 10 years from now, this will be decisive for our profits. Then the first 5 years can be completely harmless. So some of my ecological friends say we have to have a very, very high price on carbon dioxide, which may be morally correct, but in terms of influencing business in the right manner, this is a non-flying proposal.
Yes, Andreas. Yes.
Let me just add, of course, it is important also for a family not to fly to Tenerife over the weekend and this kind of stupid things. And my family and I are living in a so-called passive house, which essentially means we have no heating costs. So the very term of heating costs has disappeared from the internal communication in the family. And this I wouldn't call modesty. It's
efficiency.
It's efficiency and rational.
Rational and smart, I would say. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that there are examples for these slowly increasing prices. Maybe not all over the world on the carbon. In some countries, yes. But in Germany, for example, we had it on water, like 40 years ago or so. We introduced a very small fee on water and so on. So and that increased over the years. So technology came because companies knew sewage would become very expensive, and that was super successful at that time. And I mean, approaches like this we should identify and really establish more.
Okay, thank you. Now I would like to present a little bit of figures, because we have made a special polling special for our session about situation in Ukraine, about the public opinion towards climate change, and to the most challenging issues we are facing in Ukraine. And maybe I will ask you a couple of advice, a couple of your opinions about Ukrainian situation and Ukrainian perception. Please put it on the screen, the results of sociological polling. So 58% of Ukrainians believe that the problems of environmental pollution threatens future generations in the world more than any other problems. 73% of Ukrainians declare their readiness to act to improve the environment. However, only a portion of 37% of respondents are not ready to spend money from the total family income to set of measures to improve the environmental situation in the country. So we are aware, but we are not aware of our personal responsibility, and we are not ready to pay a check for that. How can you explain such a gap, and how can the current state of things be changed? Through education or?
Може, я як українець розпочну.
Да, дякую, Олександре.
Да, відповідати. Я думаю, що тут насправді
Maybe I will start answering as a Ukrainian. I think that the situation here is all about our not always understanding the calculation of tariffs and why we have to pay this amount of money now. Do we pay enough? Do we pay too little? We don't really understand this. If we had some public information concerning the components of the tariff, then we would understand that here we pay too much, here we pay too little. Otherwise, we don't even have an open sanitation map in Kyiv. We don't understand the way their garbage trucks are going, where they take waste and the garbage, where they don't, who pays, who doesn't pay. That's why people so far just don't realize what they're paying money for now. And the other aspect is that people, well, they just lack money for some other things which are probably more important, more topical for them now. But I think that the first criteria, the first aspect mentioned by me is more important. That's it.
German experience. You are paying probably one of the Europe highest checks for utilities, for waste recycling, and how the Germans are living with it, knowing that you are paying one of the highest checks.
well, I mean, of course, they complain like in all other countries as well. But, I mean, maybe we are better than other countries in accompanying social policy, for example, or in identifying groups where problems are and finding solutions for those problems. Because actually, I like these figures. They're not too bad. I mean, almost 50% do not have problems, obviously. And of course, I mean, nobody wants to give money away, especially in a country where so many people do not earn that much money. But that's a good start. Politicians should really work with it and go for it and show examples at the end that the regulation you did here for so many years and the policies, that they really lead to concrete examples, and then after some years show people those examples, and they will see that things will be better, and I think that's very important.
Yes, Elżbieta.
I'd like to add an example from green buildings, right? So first of all, just to echo what my colleague said here, it's great that over half of the population actually believes that something needs to be done. There is a lot of urban myths when it comes to climate, stories that people say that may or may not be true. And one of such stories is green buildings. So what we often hear is that it costs so much more money to build a building that is a passive house or a green building, right? And when we poll students at universities sometimes, they tell us, oh, it's 50% more expensive to build green. Well, we have the numbers because we actually run a program called EDGE, which is a program for green buildings in emerging markets. It costs somewhere between -2% and +15% to build a green building. However, when you look at operational cost of a building, not paying for the air conditioning or paying less for air conditioning, less for heat, it is actually cheaper. We have an example in South Africa where we built affordable housing complex with a client, which is a green building, and every month, every family saves about $40. $40 in South Africa is actually a lot of money. And this urban myth of it costs so much more to build green is actually not true, because what you are looking at is opportunity over saving the cost over the lifetime. So I think the message here is that you have to argue with dollars and hryvnias and euros as opposed to ethics and feelings, because people understand what's in their pocket much more than what's in their heart.
Thank you. Thank you. Second question from our poll is about waste recycling. The main issue from the perspective of average Ukrainian is the waste recycling issue. 62% of Ukrainians are perceiving the situation with waste recycling as unsatisfactory. But 53% of Ukrainians are not ready to pay even €7 a month for waste recycling. From what should we start? How we have to handle this gap in perception of population? Should it go through education or media campaign? What is advice to our government? How to close this gap?
My advice is to look at facts and see that what is now waste is not really recyclable. It is waste. And in the International Resource Panel, which I co-chaired with an Indian friend, we introduced the notion of remanufacturing instead of recycling. Remanufacturing essentially means that the design of a house, of a household appliance, of a car, of a camera, or whatever, must be so that at the end of life of that product, it is very easy to extract the components which should contain the valuable rare materials, etc., to extract the bulk materials, like in houses, that's important, etc. So we need a recycling-friendly design, and this is usually called remanufacturing instead of recycling, because recycling starts at a stage where it's too late, when it's already useless trash. And this is an engineering task, a policy task, and then also an education task.
Thank you.
Можна я тоді додам? Хочу додати.
I would like to add, first of all, I do agree that it's really necessary to, as quickly as possible, start covering the issue of waste collection, separate waste collection. And we have the experience in this because 5 years ago we started dealing with this issue, and we installed as many containers in our company as it was necessary to separate garbage, and we got a very good result, I would say. First of all, we don't influence any solid waste grounds which are located to us, and we have also increased our capacity because we found some clients which need the sort of plastic which could be separated from our products, or a separate film or a separate glass which could be separated from our product, extracted from it. So first of all, we were guided by the considerations of ecological expediency, but then we got a good financial result due to that. This is the first thing. And the second thing is that all Ukrainians need to understand that a cube of garbage left after good sorting would get to the solid household waste ground, where there will be no penetration of, there will be no infiltration, that will be properly delivered to that ground. So we need to start with separate waste collection, and then there is depository waste handling, package handling, and there are some also fundamentals in supermarkets to which you could get back. If you don't know what this notion stands for, that is a system when we buy a bottle for the cost of 10 hryvnias, but we pay 17. And we can throw this bottle away, but if there is a label on it, or we may give it back to a device and like return 7 hryvnias, or buy a certain other product which costs 7 hryvnias. And we can see that this is the approach in Europe. If there is some container with this depository value, so everybody is following this approach. But the main thing is that our grounds should comply with all the requirements, because we have a lot of grounds which landfills which just non-comply with the rules, with the standards, and then people will, I think, pay more. I mean, will be more willing to pay if they understand where their waste goes. Thank you, Alexander.
Maybe just quick. I mean, it's similar as the question we had before, of course. But I mean, why you always ask households? I mean, you should ask also industry, because industry has a role here, and you can start with fees for industry sector if they have too much waste, to reduce it, and that even works better if you have good competition to your industry in your country, and that very much fits to the main purpose of this whole conference. You need to have investors, you need to have competition in the industry sector, and that competition will also be on low prices, higher efficiency, less waste, better energy. I'm pretty certain about that.
Thank you, Andreas. This is exactly the type of discussion which is now ongoing. It's about introducing new type of tax, carbon tax, because in Ukraine we don't have it. And in Poland, carbon tax is like 28 euros per ton. So it's a huge potential new resource which government can use taxing polluters, taxing the bad guys, and supporting industries of future, more environmentally friendly.
May I perhaps add something of German parliamentary history? When we introduced the feed-in tariffs law for renewables, we also simultaneously introduced an ecological tax reform, making energy in small steps more expensive and reducing the cost of human labor. And that helped create and save 300,000 jobs in Germany. So it made Germany richer to have an ecological tax reform.
Thank you. Thank you. Elżbieta, you see that waste recycling is perceived number one ecological issue in our country. Do you have some projects on a radar to support as IFC in Ukraine, or some conditions should be met? What is your opinion?
So I'll pick it up where you left off on carbon taxes, carbon prices, because what we have noticed is that over the world, especially in emerging markets, you are going to have a better opportunity to invest in waste where you have so-called tipping fee, meaning if people pay to dump their waste, they are going to find opportunities to pay less. And so we have done a few projects globally in waste to energy. It was most of the time in the countries where there was industrial fee to dispose of waste. We've done a project in Indonesia. We have recently just closed a project in Belgrade. And we are looking at opportunities to invest across Eastern Europe. The tricky bit is to be able to price those externalities that we have so that you have an economic incentive to actually do that. And I'll give you another example. I work with a company called Nespresso, which produces coffee pods. We have invested with them in a couple of projects. And as you know, their pods are recyclable. And what I found really interesting and exciting is that they built the recycling facility in Switzerland and elsewhere. They open it to all the other coffee manufacturers. So it became a public good. They said, okay, we build it, we're going to open it to everyone else to do it. So what we are seeing is industrial action where it means lowering costs, but we're also seeing industrial action which creates public goods in that space. And definitely that brings opportunities to work on.
Rafael, my question is to you. Whether your company perceives looks new opportunities in the new technologies such as waste recycling or biogas. I know that your company is doing a lot in desalination. You are a global leader in resolving this issue of desalination of the marine water. Are you looking also for some opportunities in biogas or waste recycling?
Yeah, we are mainly based in renewable, solar, PV or wind onshore. We are mainly in renewable solar PV or wind onshore, but we are also in storage. Storage will be a new technology that will be served the electricity world with solar and wind. It will be part of the future, no doubt about. But we are doing something also in hydrogen, with a very low cost of the energy based in solar PV panels in very remote areas with a very high radiation. We can produce hydrogen, and hydrogen can be transported, can be stored. It is the new vector of the storage for the energy. We are also working in waste to industry, that is the remanufacturing. In waste to energy, we are today building a huge waste to energy plant in Australia, also in Aberdeen, in Scotia. So there are a lot of the technology. The technology will come. So there is no question about the technology. The technology appears because there are a lot of money, a lot of scientists invest in innovation and developing the technology. So my first word is about the rules. In this issue, it's more important the time than the cost. So the cost, where we are talking about the cost of the change, there is no cost of the change. The cost is the cost of the inaction, the cost of not changing. So if we consider the climate emergency, the climate disaster, the cost of having climate disaster in the future, this is a real cost, not the cost of of doing things. We are working in almost 20 countries, and we are separating the countries in two types. So the very emerging countries, the addition markets where new capacity is necessary because the market is growing and the citizens need to consume more electricity, and when there is necessary to put new capacity, we call the economical driven markets, because things are happening without any problem. The market needs capacity, there is no option. The only capacity that is easy, cheap, clean is renewables. Renewables is penetrating by itself in the market. The problem is in the very mature economies, Europe, the US, where that we need is to make the substitution of the existing assets, because we need to clean the energy system. And the substitution is always a problem, because when you are making the substitution, you are moving someone out of the market that is trying to defend the position. So in these cases, I think the role of the government is crucial. The economical signal is crucial in terms of carbon tax. That is the only way to make the difference between the assets that are making a negative contribution or the assets that are making a positive contribution.
Yes, Andres.
Just briefly, I want to take the chance, because you were speaking about innovation somehow, about new products, new ideas, and we didn't mention innovation so far. But I mean, I don't know of any other project or topic like energy transition and climate change where you find so much dynamics in innovation and new things like digitalization and whatever that is. You have so many startups, even in Ukraine. There is Roman, from the founder of Greencubator. We are working together on a global startup program. And all these brilliant ideas are helping so much in order to bring new spirit into a country. And if you have 100 startups here and 95 fail, you have 5 good projects and 95 brilliant people who tried something and who will try again something. So what you really need is that spirit on innovation and change. And whenever we end up in this discussion, you know, it's, well, yeah, should we really or should we not? I mean, there is no way out. Nobody in Ukraine or all over the world in these countries will be satisfied with just keeping things the way they are. Status quo is good for today, but it's not good for tomorrow. And all the parents in that room do know that. And so we should not always question too much, are things good or not, and is policy right enough, and what do we do if one person has a problem? We really should have an attitude towards the future. And well, this year, 50 years of landing on the moon, JF Kennedy and all these stories, I don't want to mention that too much, but he 7 years before they landed on the moon, he gave a great speech at Rice University. And I mean, you should really look at it. It was very, very, very promising. He said, you know, we choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Because this challenge is one we are willing to accept. And I mean, this is the attitude we need. We are not willing to postpone, but we will, which one we will really solve. And I think with that attitude, we can really change the world. Sorry for that.
Can I add to that? I think just to echo the innovation, it is not only in energy, it is in every single sector that impacts climate change. It's in Alexander's sector, in animal nutrition, it is in the sector of land management, it is in smart cities, it is in green buildings, it is in financial innovation and green bonds. And I want to leave the audience with one question. Those of you who are going to be retiring in 2050, or 2045 or 2055, do you really want to have your pension invested in technologies that were designed in 1900? Or would you prefer to have your pension for 2050 invested in assets and in technologies that are designed today?
Yes, that's a good question, very reasonable. Ernst?
I fully concur with this plea for innovation, no doubt. However, I'm just coming from South Africa and was very melancholic about it. I mean, they have a policy of increasing coal burning as sort of their national consensus, which is crazy. And their families typically have 5 to 7 children, leading to more joblessness, more criminality, etc. And everybody knows that. They don't do anything because the frame conditions are such that you can get rich by doing the wrong thing. This has to be changed and addressed, but not wait until the South Africans learn it. This could take 100 years. No, we have to take the initiative. That's actually also an innovation thing. And for that, the German Council for Global Environmental Change 10 years ago has proposed something which I find absolutely ingenious, the so-called budget approach for climate policy, which essentially says all countries of the world will have an identical right per person for using the atmosphere. But the old industrialized countries have more or less eaten up their permits and would now have to go shopping to developing countries like South Africa, buying permits because they have not yet used up all their permits. And that, for the first time in history, would lead the economic minister of India, of Swaziland, of Uruguay or so, to decide, stop building coal power plants, accelerate the transition to efficiency and renewables, and sell the freed permits to the old industrialized countries. That for the first time would give a chance of returning to a reasonable policy in those countries which need money, which need education, which need cooperation north-south, which need innovation and all that, but under the current incentive structure, they do the opposite.
Я скоро буду готовий передати питання.
Soon I will be ready to go over to Q&A session, so if you have any questions, please get ready.
Panelists about green benefits, about investment in the green technologies, enabling local companies to face the challenges of climate change. What do you think Ukrainian government should guarantee? What preconditions do we have to provide for potential investors in order to attract new investments into green benefits? Maybe Elżbieta. What are minimum conditions that you are looking for emerging markets?
I can start it. I'm sure my colleagues will have things to add. I think a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, stability of the government regulation, right? And we echoed it, all of us here. Companies that are investing here, both local companies and foreign companies, need to have a certainty of tariffs, certainty on carbon pricing. As we mentioned before, it doesn't matter how much the carbon price is. Maybe you can set it up lower and make it grow over time, but that certainty of regulatory environment is critical. The second thing that we have seen that is helping a lot is going through the financial sector, through the financial system, working with banks and allowing them to increase the proportion of green assets on their books. And that can be done through a regulator, that can be done through a central bank, but basically encouraging banks to start thinking about climate, both in terms of risks, what are they carrying on their books, but also in terms of their ability to underwrite green loans, to help issue green bonds, and to basically create conditions for climate-smart investments.
I know that Ukrgazbank is one of the main partners for Ukrainian green businesses. So I assume that whenever you will announce your good news, they will continue investing into this sector and develop their green books.
Absolutely, and I think what we actually have done in many emerging markets is we work with regulators. We have something called Sustainable Banking Network, where we have 39 regulators around the world. Those are banking regulators who started to think about what they need to do in their countries to encourage green lending, to encourage lending into climate-smart investments, to help issue green bonds. And so it's not only Ukrgas Bank, we are very proud of what they have achieved, but also bringing in incentives for other banks to start playing in that space, because that's where you can actually influence through flow of funds.
Thank you. Rafael, maybe you will add on it, because you are already an investor in our country. You are a global company which believed in Ukrainian economy, which found an opportunity to resolve some important issues, bring investment, know-how, and you are now running a quite successful business in this country. What are the preconditions you expect now as from Ukrainian government, Ukrainian state, as already investor in Ukrainian economy?
Yeah, we are a company that we are investing today in Ukraine in renewables, and the idea is to invest more. So the main characteristic of the renewable investor is that it's not a speculative investor, it's a long-term investor, because the assets are here forever. So after coming to a new country, we are new neighbors in the country. So we are Ukrainian here today as new investors. The idea is that in the future there will be no room for companies without a double dividend. So our obligation is to deliver dividends to the shareholders, but also to deliver dividends to the society, to the country or to the market where we are operating. Was that we are asking to the government stability. So if we are coming into a new market, knowing the rules and knowing the situation or knowing the tariffs, and our business model is on these figures, that we need to ask is stability of the rules for the period for 10 or 15 for time enough to make the business case. It's very dangerous for the public image of the country, of the market, to change the rules in the middle of the game. So we are operating in very remote areas, from Australia to India to Chile or Costa Rica, and we are very careful about choosing the markets before investing according with the fundamentals of the market. Size is important, dependency is important, because renewables are permitting to the market to be independent, to save a lot of money in terms of commercial export or import in fuel, and also attending to the stability of the governments, of the rules, and going together with multilateral banks. Things are always more clear.
Yes, Ernst.
I'm sorry, I'd like to advertise a book of the Club of Rome, which in a sense gives lots of answers. It's called Come On and has been translated into Ukrainian. It's available now. And the second half of the book goes into energy policy, agriculture policy, transport, circular economy, control of financial sector. And then one peculiar thing, the idea for a government to create a ministry that could be called cohabitation ministry, with the exclusive mandate of finding and developing programs that make the own country, the Ukraine in this case, better and richer, and help as many other countries as possible, which is easier to accomplish than creating a world state. That will never really function. But helping identify cooperation, and here the Belt and Road program of the Chinese can be very helpful, because they are very much interested in Europe more than in America. They bow to Europe because they find that much more agreeable than those people who are currently sitting in the White House. So there are many possibilities in all sectors of a typical government where you can do the right things for you and your posterity.
Thank you, Professor. I have to say that in Ukraine we have such a tradition that every government comes and develops a new strategy. And every next government has to revise the strategy or even develop a new one. On our previous panel with the Minister of Energy, it was announced that currently government is about to rethink the existing strategy of renewables, even though it was implemented maybe 3 years ago. Andreas, my question is to you. Germany is a country where the strategies are developed for a long term. Every next government is not about to revise the strategy until it is executed. How often do you amend strategies in Germany or in European Union, and what is the German secret about it?
Well, of course, we change energy laws like once a week, kind of, because we have so many energy laws by now, and we change laws here and there. But the overall strategy, I would say, we could change more often than we do, because we have this strategy now since kind of 20 years, and now slowly some other aspects are coming into it, like a carbon price and so on. But regarding, I mean, I get your point. And I've seen many presentations from the old government and also the new government about, you know, the regulations, the plans, and the efficiency plans in the building sector, in the energy sector, and so on. And I must really say, I think it was very good stuff. I saw very good stuff, very good projects. But also, I can also see that many people out there are getting nervous. When do they start doing action? When can we really get started with policies? And I think the current government should make clear, you know, what will stay and what will be reconsidered. But they should also say what will stay. I mean, they changed the Ministry for Energy and Coal into the Ministry for Energy and the Environment. That's smart. I mean, that's a good idea, I must say. So, of course, a new government has changes, but do not forget to focus on action. People want to see these new lighthouses, because otherwise you can't convince them. And there are some coming up, and well, we should not stop having more.
Thank you, Andreas. Шановні друзі, а тепер ми можемо задати.
Dear colleagues, and now you have a chance to ask questions from the audience. If you have any questions, please raise your hands and speak to the microphone. Good afternoon. Alexei from BIOC project dealing with plastic production. Are you ready to invest into the plastic industry? And if yes, then how could we cooperate with you?
Bioplastic. Are you considering in your portfolio the startups who are developing this technology, and if you are ready to consider?
Yeah, so we are investing mainly in more established companies. We invest annually about $10 to $12 billion a year, but we have a small portfolio of startups. Annually, we invest about $150 million in various startups. We are not sector specific, meaning we invest across all the technologies. And when it comes to climate, we have invested in off-grid solar, we have invested in bioenergy, we have invested in a number of technologies. So again, we are not a mainstream investor in startups, but very selectively we can look at opportunities that are being brought to us. And in terms of how to go about it, we've got our country manager sitting right there, and I'm sure he could have a conversation with you.
Thank you. Roman?
For really thought-provoking panel. I'm representing an organization which is supporting early-stage green ventures, so we might need to talk someday, from green mobility to green mathematics for logistics or green titanium for aerospace. But my question, Elżbieta, I'm really thankful for you and for Serhii to the reference for green books and green portfolio and growth of this component, and as well as personal retirement funds. But when do we start to measure green GDP of economies and how we can do it? So that's not just exclusively to one distinguished panelist, maybe to everybody. How can we understand it? The GDP of the country is brown, green, or slightly green-washed. How is there a methodology to do that? Thank you.
In the Club of Rome, this has been a discussion for decades. One of the most prominent promoters of that is Robert Costanza, an American now living in Australia, together with his colleague Ida Kubiszewski. And they say, of course, that the present GDP is only a measure of economic turnover. And each additional traffic accident increases GDP, but not happiness. And they try to come closer to what in the Himalayan country of Bhutan has been developed of a happiness index to supplant or accompany the GDP, which essentially means that not only economics count, but also other measures of happiness. And that goes then into family questions. How happy are children? I mean, breastfeeding, according to good psychologists, is good for the child, but bad for the GDP. Because for the GDP, it's good if they buy all formula milk, you know. So this kind of new thinking is necessary. However, turnover is strongly correlated with jobs, and it's strongly correlated with fiscal income. And this is the reason why it is never abandoned. So we need probably two in parallel. One essentially a job market kind of thing, and the other a happiness kind of thing. It's also in the book.
One more question, please.
Good day to the audience. My name is Azamat, and I'm traveling from Kazakhstan to have a chance to listen to all the great ideas in this forum. So thank you for this. A question to the dear panel members. A bit too broad, but let me try. Do you see any effect of the latest Paris climate agreements in your respective areas? If yes, can you provide some examples? If no, then where do you see the disconnect takes place?
The Paris Agreement, you mean?
Yes.
Paris Agreement, yes.
I think we all would say yes. I mean, that's what I was mentioning before. Since Paris, decarbonization is irreversible. And you really see all countries all over the world at least thinking about those programs. So it does have a lot of impact on all of our jobs, and it will even be more. But for Europe, I can really say we have tough times reaching the targets for 2030. But you know what? They don't care in the European Union. They will even have stronger targets. And we might fail, yeah, okay. But then we at least try hard and harder. And we will try harder and harder. We will innovate harder and harder. So I think that changed the world, I really must say.
Thank you. The last question from the audience, and we will make a conclusion.
Andrei Morozovsky, Business Magazine.
Andrei Morozovsky, Business Magazine.
For me, the biggest question right now, maybe you can update me on it, is whether we go fully green growth or the technology is not developed sufficiently enough so that we should consider degrowth. The thing that Sergei brought up about modesty, about changing consumption patterns, about buying less cars, about sharing the shared economy, etc. It's kind of philosophical question, but if you could elaborate on it, I would greatly appreciate. And I could add a slightly more question, since we are mentioning China everywhere, like almost 30% of carbon emissions are produced by China. And about 60% of this just because they use coal for producing electricity. Do you think some kind of world government, United Nations, should talk strictly to China, or what kind of cooperation should we create as human beings, as humanity, so that we can influence things like you've mentioned, Ernst, about South Africa? Thanks a lot.
Professor.
China is not easy to judge. A month ago, I was at the first non-European international Passive House conference in China, where the city of Gaobeidian, 600,000 inhabitants, is now planning the by far largest city quarters for, I believe, 30,000 people of all passive houses, which is far more than any European city would do. So they are interested in it, and the 13th five-year plan of China is the most aggressive greening strategy of any nation of the world. But at the same time, the same government is financing coal power plants in Vietnam with a promise to buy all the electricity so the dirt remains in Vietnam and the clean electricity is in China. So it is a problematic thing. Just bashing China doesn't help. But the cooperation, and here again I'm repeating the new Silk Road idea of the Chinese. They are very eager to cooperate with Europe in the greening technologies. And for Kazakhstan, they are mostly interested in raw materials, I fear. But for the European countries, and I would assume including Ukraine, they would be willing to really cooperate. So it's a mixed bag, and there is not one answer. I have the experience that working with the Chinese, I was member of the so-called China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development, is a pleasure. But sometimes there are others in China who do the opposite.
Thank you, Ernst. Thank you, dear panelists. Our time is running so quickly. One last question to conclude. So we've been talking about changes. Changes are something that is inevitable. So it's happening and happening much faster than expected, and happening in all areas, including climate change. So if the business has to face the changes, are the changes a threat or an opportunity? Just one short answer to this question. And
23 trillion business opportunity. $23 trillion business opportunity.
From the banking point of view, it's 23 billion market. It's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I can only agree on that. I mean, there's billions, trillions in English out there. There's a transformation of the global energy markets, a transformation of the global energy market, adding up to all of this. The risk is doing nothing and just watching it.
Fully agree. The decarbonization of the economy in the world is an opportunity for business, no doubt.
For me, the greatest business is energy efficiency. And I allow myself of explaining. I ask always my students, how many kilowatt hours would you need to lift a 10 kilograms weight, like this, yeah, from sea level to the top of Mount Everest? And the typical answer I get from American students is in the vicinity of 1,000 kilowatt hours, and in European it's in the vicinity of 100. Both is wrong. The physicist's answer is 1/4 of a kilowatt hour will do. You know? A kilowatt hour is a powerhouse, and we waste it no end because it doesn't cost a thing. I then always ask my students, who of you would be willing to climb up Everest and deliver that heavy weight there for a honorarium of 6 euro cents? And nobody would do it, you know? So energy efficiency is the sleeping giant.
Alexander?
Впевнений, що
I'm a threat and opportunity. I'm sure that in a short-term prospect, that is a threat. In the long-term prospect, that is an opportunity. And not just an opportunity to improve energy efficiency of all the processes, but that is also an opportunity to change the mindset and to have the so-called carbon thinking. And that is the largest, the greatest opportunity we have. Everybody realizes that ecology also stands for ideology, and if you have the right thinking, you will also get the right output and you will choose the right track. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for such a meaningful discussion, and it was a great pleasure to have you as experts at our Kyiv International Economic Forum. I think it's only a beginning of discussion on climate changes, and next year we will have a continuation of this discussion. So thank you so much for your valuable input. Thank you.